And that conversation always has multi-layers. There's a level of the communication, which is the nigla, and then from there, to hear the neshama of the Rabban Shalom Kiviyachol. He's speaking to our neshama. So that's what we're going to try to do for a few opportunities, to take some aspects of Chanukah, of Purim, in nigla, and see what the avoid is in it within Penimiyus. Okay. So let's begin like this. We know that when it comes to Purim, there's a number of mitzvahs that we have on Purim, right? So you have the Suda, you have Shalach Manas, you have Matanis Lavyanim, and you have Mikra Megillah, right? Those are the mitzvahs that you have on Purim. Now what's interesting is that 3 out of those 4, the Suda, Shalach Manas, and Matanis Lavyanim, are performed during the day of Purim, right? Mikra Megillah is also by the day, but we do it twice. We do Mikra Megillah also at night. So Mikra Megillah is at night and then by the day. The other 3 are dafka by the day. So that's what we're going to be investigating today, this morning. That inyan, that Mikra Megillah, is unique, that it's night and then day as well. Okay, so let's go through the sugya and halacha for a few minutes, and then we'll see the Penimiyus of it as well. Okay, so it begins like this, in Maramaka number 1. There's a Gemara Megillah Daf Daled Amud Aleph. Now again, bear in mind that the obligation of reading the Megillah is mentioned in the Megillah itself. Megillah says that these days, at the Yontiv of Purim, should be Nizkarim V'Nasim. They should be remembered and they should be performed. Remembered, Nizkarim V'Nasim, and performed. And the Gemara says that the tradition is that what that means is that the pasuk, the Megillah is telling us, the Nevuah of the Megillah is telling us that the Purim should be remembered. In other words, that you should read the Megillah, and by reading the Megillah, you should remember the story. That's the chiyuv of reading the Megillah. And Nasim, it should be performed. That's referring to the mitzvahs maisiyas, the physical mitzvahs that we do. Shalach Manas, Matanis Avyanim, the Suda. So the pasuk is telling us that the mitzvahs of Purim involve Mikra Megillah, that's the Nizkarim, the Nasim, and physical mitzvahs. Okay, but the Megillah doesn't tell us that there's something different, that the Mikra Megillah is done twice. It doesn't say like that. It just says the chiyuv of Mikra Megillah plus the other mitzvahs. But the source of Mikra Megillah being twice is the Gemara in Megillah, Daf Daled Amud Aleph. So Maramaka number 1, the Gemara says like this: Rabbi Yeshua Levi. Rabbi Yeshua Levi taught, Chayiv Adam Likras is a Megillah b'Layla. A person is obligated to read the Megillah at night, and to repeat it by the day. That's what Rabbi Yeshua Levi said. That Taka Mikra Megillah is unique. It should be read at night and repeated over again by Purim day. Shenamar. So what's the pasuk? What's the source of this? It's interesting. It's not a pasuk in the Megillah. It's a pasuk in Tehillim. Elakai, David Melech says, Rabbeinu Shloim Ekra Yaimam, I call out to you by the day. V'layla v'loydum yuli, and at night I'm also not silent. So David Melech says, I call to you by the day, and I'm not silent by the night. I call to you at night as well. And Rabbi Shimon Levi, interestingly, says that pasuk is a reference to Megillah. Even though we think of Megillah as learning, it's a story that you're reading from Tanakh. But the pasuk in Tehillim that Rabbi Shimon Levi associates it with is a pasuk about Megillah. He says, I call out to you by the day. That's talking about reading Megillah by the day. And even at night, I'm not silent. That's referring to reading the Megillah at night. That's Rabbi Shimon Levi. Okay. Savr Mina. Now the Gemara goes on interesting. Savr Mina, the Talmidim, the Bnei HaYeshiva, when they heard this statement from Rabbi Shimon Levi, what they made a mistake in interpretation. They thought, again, the words of Rabbi Shimon Levi were that a person chayiv adam likras is a Megillah b'Layla. You have to read the Megillah b'Layla at night. V'lushanoisa bayan. Now the word shanoisa, what does that word mean? So I translated it means to repeat, because that's how the Gemara eventually interprets it. But Savr Mina, but the Bnei HaYeshiva thought that what Rabbi Shimon Levi meant is L'mikra b'Layla, to read the Megillah at night. V'lo misna masnisin today b'yamama. V'lo shnaisa could also come from the word shina, which means learning. Mm-hmm. So they thought maybe it means that read the Megillah at night and learn Mesechus Megillah by the day. Learn the Mishnayos of Megillah by the day. That's what they thought. Amar l'hu Rav Yirmiyah. But Rav Yirmiyah, I guess, was in the yeshiva, and he told the Bnei HaYeshiva that no, that's not what it means. That I heard the proper interpretation from Rav Chia bar Abba, who I guess had this tradition from Rabbi Shimon Levi, that the word l'shanoisa that Rabbi Shimon Levi said, he didn't mean like Mishnah, not from the word Mishnah, but rather it means like the same word Mishnah can mean learning like Mishnayos, and it can also mean to repeat. It meant to repeat it, that you say it at night and you repeat it by the day. Going down Riinchi, like how people say, ever Parsha Sadov, that's Naya. I'm going to learn the Parsha, I'm going to chazir it over, to repeat it over. That's what it means. That's the Gemara, that's Rabbi Shimon Levi, that a person has to read the Megillah at night and repeat it by the day. Now, Bez Hashem, soon we're going to get back to this confusion that the Bnei HaYeshiva thought that he meant to read it at night and to learn the Mishnayos by the day. We'll get into it later, but that's Rabbi Shimon Levi. Okay. Comes Rabbeinu Tam. And this is a sheet of Rabbeinu Tam that's quoted by many Rishonim. Taisvus quotes it, the Rosh, and the Rit from the Raya. All the Rishonim in Megillah quote this Rabbeinu Tam. So Marmukah number 2, I'll quote it, how the Rush brings it down. But this is a Rabbeinu Tam that, like I said, many Rishonim quote, and he's talking about this halacha of reading the Megillah twice. So it's a Rush again in the first parak of Megillah, Siman Vav. Hayaymer Rabbeinu Tam Zal. Rabbeinu Tam used to say that Afal Pi Sheberach Zman V'Layla. So let me give you a little bit of background. We have mitzvahs that are repeated throughout a yontif, right? So for example, on Sukkot, you sit in the Sukkah throughout Sukkot, right? Chanukah, you light the candles throughout Chanukah. So we have this concept of doing a mitzvah multiple times throughout a yontif. Now, generally speaking, the first time you do a mitzvah, a yearly mitzvah and so on, besides the regular bracha of Asher Kitchanu, whatever the mitzvah is, you make a shechion. Right? That's what you do. Now, but usually when you have a mitzvah that's repeated a number of times in a span of a few days, like on Sukkot or Chanukah, whatever, so you make a shechion the first time, and then you don't have to make a shechion anymore. So the first night that you sit in Sukkah, you make a shechion. You don't make a shechion during Chol Hamoed when you sit in Sukkah. The first time you light Chanukah candles, the first night you make a shechion. Even if you're going to make 2 the next night, then 3 the next night, you made shechion already on Halakas Ner Chanukah. So Rabbeinu Tam is dealing with the following thing. So we read the Megillah at night, and then you're going to repeat it by the day. So the first time you read the Megillah, you're going to make a shechion. You haven't read the Megillah in a year, for sure. But should you make a shechion tomorrow morning, the next morning of Purim? I don't know. By Sukkot, you don't make a shechion after the first time you sit in Sukkah. Chanukah, you don't make a shechion after the first time you light the candles. So l'chara, you make the shechion by Mikra Megillah at night, and then you're doing the mitzvah again the next day, which is you make a bracha for it, but not a shechion. Rabbeinu Tam said not like that. Afal pi sheberach zman b'layla, even though you make a shechianu at night when you read the Megillah, because it's the first time you're reading Megillah in a year, chayz muvarach zman af b'yam. Said Rabbeinu Tam, this is different. It's not like Sukkah, it's not like Chanukah. You have to make a shechianu again the next day. Why? You did this mitzvah last night. You're repeating it. You're doing it again. So every time you do a mitzvah again and again and again, you don't make a shechianu. Said Rabbeinu Tam, no. The ikar kriyas ahavi b'yam yaisim b'layla. Because even though it seemed, you're repeating it, right? It doesn't feel like it's anything new. Said Rabbeinu Tam, the Iker mitzvah of Mikra Megillah is primarily by the day. The secondary reading is really the first reading of at night. So Rabbeinu Tam is telling us that this is not the same, like by Sukkot, for example. You sit in the Sukkah the first night. That's a mitzvah. And then you just repeat it throughout the days of Sukkot. They're at least equal to each other. They're not... The following, the second day of Sukkot is not more chashuv than the first. Says Rabbeinu Tam, not so when it comes to this halacha of reading the Megillah. Reading the Megillah, Chazal made in such a way that the primary reading is by the day, and the secondary reading is by night. Even though you would think it will be we'll see about that, but the primary reading is by day. Therefore, says Rabbeinu Tam, even though you made a shechianu at night, you still make another shechianu by the day. Why? Because by the day it's a higher level of reading. The ikar mitzvah is really by the day, and therefore the shechianu that you made at night doesn't work for that was being said for the secondary mitzvah. The primary mitzvah still is something new and a chiddush, and you need to make a shechianu on that. Now Rabbeinu Tam goes to bring us a few proofs that this is true, that the reading by the day is the primary reading. And he gives a few rayas. We'll break it down. First of all, he says the hachi mash malishin dekra, the pasuk that Rabbi Shimon Levi used as a proof that you have to read the Megillah twice. That pasuk in Tehillim, in fact, indicates that the main reading is by the day. Because what was the pasuk? The pasuk says, "Hashem, I call out to you by the day, and even at night, I'm not going to be silent." Right? So in that pasuk, the pasuk is gives off the impression that the main calling of David Melech is by the day. I call to you by the day. That's the main thing. And I'm also not going to be quiet at night. So also call out to you at night. So it sounds like the main calling out is by the day. So Rabbi Shimon Levi is using that pasuk as the source of reading the Megillah twice. So that tells you that just like in the pasuk, calling out by the day was the main point of David Melech in that sentence. So too it is with reading the Megillah. The hachi mash milish dekra. First of all, that's how the pasuk sounds. Ekra yaima. That David Melech said, "I'm calling out to you by the day." That's the main calling out. Afal pi shalayla loydum you l'kras b'layla. Even though I called out to you last night, the yom te ikar kriyasava. The ikar calling out is by the day. So that's the first proof that the pasuk Rabbi Shimon Levi quotes indicates this. Aleph. Second, v'gam ikar persumei nisa hu b'yayim. Second of all, we know the Gemara tells us in a few places in Maseches Megillah that part of the inyan of reading the Megillah is persumei nisa, is to publicize the nes. The Gemara says the halach is that if there's anywhere that there's a larger Megillah reading, then you should go to a larger place. Part of the halach is persumei nisa. And says Rabbeinu Tam, the main Persuminis is going to be by the day. Most people are around, they're about. Persuminis is going to be more by the day. Bisman Mishta V'Simcha Matanas Avyonim Mishlech Manas. That's when all the other inyanim of Persuminis are taking place. That's when people like Purim, the day of Purim is more, Purim-dik than the night. So, therefore, the same thing with Rikka Megillah, that the Iker is going to be by the day, because again, the Persuminis is more by the day than it is by night. That's proof number 2. Proof number 3, says Rabbeinu Tam. Utnan lakamon. There's a Mishnah later on in Maseches Megillah Daf Chaf and Bebeis. The Mishnah is going through different mitzvahs that are day mitzvahs and mitzvahs that are night mitzvahs. And the way the Mishnah sort of sets it up is that, these following mitzvahs are day mitzvahs. These following mitzvahs are night mitzvahs. Day mitzvahs you have the whole day. Night mitzvahs you have the whole night. So the Mishnah says like this. One of the things that it lists is the mitzvah of reading the Megillah. And guess which category it puts it in? So the Mishnah says, Kol hayoim kosher likras ha-Megillah. The mitzvah of reading the Megillah, the Mishnah lists as one of the day mitzvahs. One of the day mitzvahs. The Chol halayla kosher likras ha-Megillah loiketan. But says Rabbeinu Tam, interestingly enough, the Mishnah does not have any reference of reading the Megillah at night. So why not? Rabbi Shimon Levi said we repeat the Megillah twice. So why would the Mishnah not call it a day mitzvah and a night mitzvah? The answer is because the main reading is by the day. So the Mishnah is talking about the main mitzvah of reading the Megillah, and the main mitzvah of reading the Megillah is a day mitzvah. And that's why the Mishnah only records it on the list of day mitzvahs. Because the main reading is not at night, the main reading is by the day. Final raya, v'hachinami mashma, and another proof is from the actual source in Megillah Esther of reading the Megillah. I mentioned in the beginning, what does the pasuk say in Megillah as a source of the whole concept of reading the Megillah? Nizkar v'nasim, right? It says that the Purim should be remembered. In other words, you should read the Megillah on Purim, and it should be performed, and you should do Matanas Lavyonim, Mishalach Manas, and so on. The Iskish Zechir Lasi. It means that the pasuk is connecting those two things: that you have a mitzvah of reading the Megillah, and you have a mitzvah of performing the mitzvahs of Purim. And so Hakish means these two things are connected to each other, which means that Ma Ikra Siya B'Imama, just like the mitzvahs that we do, the Nasim of Purim, Shalach Manas, Matanas Lavyonim, and the Suda are by the day. Av Schir again, so to read the Megillah is by the day. So even though we read at night, but it means that the primary reading is going to be by the day. So that's the Shita of Rabbeinu Tam. And again, and because of this says Rabbeinu Tam, so if you made a Shachyono at night, which is appropriate because you haven't read the Megillah in a whole year, but you still have to make a Shachyono the next day because the next day is the main reading. So you made a Shachyono at night for a new mitzvah, but that mitzvah was a secondary reading. When you get to the morning, this is a primary reading which you haven't had in a year. So you have to make another Shachyono. That's Rabbeinu Tam. Now, interesting, just one other raya that the Rishonim bring down to prove this point. In Marmukah number 3, so this is from the Sefer Or Zarua. The Or Zarua was also one of the Ashkenaz Rishonim in Germany, one of the later Rishonim, and he quotes this Rabbeinu Tam with all the proofs that we saw. So again, like we said, Rabbeinu Tam has a bunch of proofs, but the Or Zarua brings down another interesting proof as well. So Or Zarua, this is in Shin Samach Tes in Or Zarua. V'hachi muchach b'Yerushalmi. The Or Zarua brings down a proof to Rabbeinu Tam's opinion again, that the main reading is by the day, from Yerushalmi. Damasik, now this following halacha that's recorded in the Talmud of Yerushalmi is not recorded in Talmud Bavli, so we don't hold like this, but the fact that the Yerushalmi says this tells us something. So it says the Yerushalmi like this, an interesting halacha. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak suggested the following halacha. Ger Shamol Acher Sheher HaMizrach. Let's say you have a situation of a person that's converting to become a Yid, and his gerus is on Purim. So he has a bris milah, he goes to the mikveh on Purim day. So the question is, so he becomes a Yid, mamish on Purim. So is he now obligated to read the Megillah, in the remainder time of the day? Because now, obviously, before he was Megayer, he's not Jewish, he's not obligated in Purim. But now he's a Yid, so now maybe he's obligated in Purim. So said Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Ger Shamol Acher Sheher HaMizrach, if this person was Megayer already into Purim day, Kfar Nifter. He's not obligated in any of the mitzvahs of Purim. Why? Said Rav Nachman Yitzchak, because it's an interesting way of thinking about it. Rav Nachman Yitzchak says there's a certain moment when all the chiyuvim of Purim come, and that's the moment to receive it. And if you pass by that moment and you weren't able to receive those mitzvahs, then they don't come to you later. The moment when all the mitzvahs of Purim come to you, says Rav Nachman Yitzchak in the Yerushalmi, is right in the morning of Purim, like sunrise of Purim. That's when all the mitzvahs come. So if at that moment you're a Yid, Gevaldik. But if already at that moment the person wasn't Jewish, and then become Jewish 10 minutes later, that window of opportunity was gone, and then he's left out. He doesn't have the mitzvahs of Purim. That's the Yerushalmi. Ger Shamol Acher Sheher Mizrach. And as a guy became a ger after sunrise Purim morning, Farnifter, then he's putter from all the mitzvahs of Purim. So says the Arzarua. 1 second. If the mitzvah of reading is already from the night before, then why is the moment when all the shefa of Purim comes the sunrise? I would think the moment when all the shefa of Purim comes is nightfall, Purim night, because that's when the mitzvahs of Purim begin. The mitzvahs of Purim begin by reading the Megillah Purim night. So why is Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak saying that the moment when all Purim comes is really Purim morning, and then sort of like, and that's the moment of opportunity? Says the Arzarua, well, you see from there that the Yerushalmi is coming from the same way of thinking as Rabbeinu Tam, which is that even though you read the Megillah at night, that's a secondary reading. It's not the primary reading. The primary reading is by the day, and the primary chiyuv of and all the chiyuvim of Purim are really coming from that moment in the morning. Since that moment in the morning is going to come, so you already sort of read a Megillah, preemptively, secondarily, the night before. But the main moment when all the shefa of Purim comes is really in the morning. And that's Rabbeinu Tam's point, that the main kriya, the main reading is the morning, and that's the final raya of Rabbeinu Tam. Okay, so that's the sheet of Rabbeinu Tam. But again, the main reading of Mikra Megillah, despite the fact that we read at night, the main reading is by the day. Okay, but now we have to understand, okay, what does that mean exactly? Like primary, secondary, like what does that mean? So the Achrayim come and give a very, a little bit more of a definitive explanation of what this Rabbeinu Tam means. A primary reading by the day and a secondary reading at night. What exactly does that mean? So in Maramukah number 4, you have from the Night of Yehuda, great place, the Night of Yehuda. So this is in his Chuvas in Madura Kama or Chaim Siman Mem Aleph. The Night of Yehuda says the following Geder to understand Rabbeinu Tam Shita. We know, we'll give a little bit of a background. We know that in Torah there's two types of mitzvahs, two types of obligations we have. You have Deraisa, you have biblical obligations, and then you have Derabanan. You have rabbinic obligations. So it's interesting. Purim is what? Purim is not midrabanan. Purim is not midrabanan. Midrabanan means mitzvahs that are not from Tanakh, right? They're post-Tanakh, right? Purim is in Tanakh, Megillah Esther. Right, I said, like Niskar V'Naisim, all the mitzvahs of Purim are recorded in Megillah Esther. Megillah Esther was written with Nevuah. It's written with Ruach HaKodesh. So Mikra Megillah and the mitzvahs of Purim are not midrabanan. You can't call them midaraisa per se because it's not chumash, but it's classified as divrei Kabbalah. That's what it's called. Divrei Kabbalah means that it's a Dvar Hashem. It's certainly coming from the Rabbanu Shloim. It's Nevuah. It's Ruach HaKodesh. It's from Tanakh. It's not. It wasn't necessarily said explicitly by Moshe Rabbeinu, his level of Nevuah, but it's coming from Nevi'im. It's coming from Nevi'im. It's coming from the Dvar Hashem. This is why, by the way, the Gemara Megillah has a whole story that when Mordechai and Esther wanted to establish the Yontif of Purim and make Megillah Esther and really, make a whole thing of it, so they asked the Sanhedrin permission. Permission of the Sanhedrin. And the Gemara says the whole mindset that the Sanhedrin would not give them permission to do this until they found a hint in Chumash to the concept of Purim and all the mitzvahs of Purim. And the Achrayim is, well, what's the big deal? I mean, you have Midrabanan, you have Muksa, you have Shabbos Kam. Why all of a sudden Chazal are not going to make the mitzvah of Chanukah unless you find a hint in Chumash? Why over here do you need a hint in Chumash? Well, the answer is because Mordechai and Esther were not asking to make a Darbana. They were asking to establish the Divrei Kabbalah, that there should be an obligation on the Jewish people to keep Purim because of Nevuah. Well, Nevuah already has to go back to Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah. And so once the Sanhedrin found a hint in Chumash to the musig of remembering Amalek and commemorating the event that we have in conquering Amalek, okay, fine. So we already have a root in Torah's Moshe and Nevuah's Moshe to such a thing. So that's what's going on. So Megillah is, according to many Achrayim, you even find that they'll even refer to Purim as Deraisa because it's Nevuah. It's Nevuah. And so too, again, reading the Megillah is going to be Nevuah. Comes the night of Yid and says, but this is the difference between the reading the Megillah by the day and reading the Megillah at night. Reading the Megillah by the day, that is obligated because of Megillah Esther, Niskar V'Naisim, and that is Divrei Kabbalah. That's because of Nevuah. Reading the Megillah at night, that was an invention midrabanan. That was an invention midrabanan. So it's not just primary, secondary, it's fundamentally different. Reading the Megillah by the day, that's B'divrei Nevuah. That's like a Daraisa concept from the Nevi'im. Masha'enkin, reading the Megillah at night, that was a Darabanan that was established not Mitzad Nevuah, but just as a Darabanan. More than that, we'll see it inside together, there are some Achrayim that suggest that not only are they fundamentally different, that by the day is like Daraisa, and by the nighttime it's Midrabanan, but it actually historically took place at different times. There are Achrayim that suggest that by the time of Megillah, by the time of Purim, that was when the Kriya by the day was established from Nevuah. Only by the times of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, which we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of years later, did Chazal come up with this idea of enacting Midrabanan to read Mikra Megillah at night as well. And that's why some Achronim say, like, why is there no recording in all of Mishnayos and all of Brises? There's no such hint that there's such a thing as reading Megillah at night. The first place that we have anywhere in Chazal such an inyan of reading Megillah at night is Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. If anything, in Mishnayos it sounds like there is no reading at night, because that Mishnah that Rabbeinu Tam brought as a proof, that Mishnah that lists mitzvahs by the day and mitzvahs at night, it only mentions Megillah by the day. And in fact, there's a Tosefta, which is a Brisa, and the Brisa says, a language, that if you read Megillah at night, you're not Yotzei. You're supposed to read the Megillah at night. You're Yotzei reading at night. Obviously, you're not Yotzei reading by the day. What is it? The Brisa says, you're not Yotzei if you read the Megillah at night. So some Achronim suggest, by the time of Mishnayos, by the time of Brises, was no such concept. This was a later decree midrabanan by the times of Yeshua ben Levi. So listen, you could debate that point, whether historically it came later, but the concept is this idea that fundamentally they are different. The reading by the day is Midivrei Nevuah, and the reading by the night is midrabanan. Take a look at Maramaka number 4.
I think it says Chiyav Hayom. The Chiyav is on the Yom to have Megillah and a Shnach one.
So it's because they Tzumah Shel Yom, the Yontif of Purim.
Yom. It says Yom. It doesn't say Laila. The Chiyav is on the day itself to do the Megillah and the Shnach one is on the.
See, that's a Lamdish Nakuda. Huh? But the mitzvah is fundamentally different. There's a Darabanan mitzvah by the night that requires a Shachianu, and by the next morning, now you're doing a new mitzvah. It looks the same, it's the same word, same truck, you know what I mean? But it's a different mitzvah. Now it's Midivrei Nevuah, and that needs a new Shachianu. Take a look at Maramaka number 4. This is Night of Yehuda again. The near Lani is Daiti. It seems to me, says the Night of Yehuda, the Kriyas HaMegillah Delilah, reading the Megillah at night, Lav mitzvah say Midivrei Kabbalah. That's not from Nevuah. It's not from Megillah Sester. That's not the same. That's not coming from the same place as Shalpmanis, Montanas Lavyanim. Rak Kriyas HaYom. That's only reading by the day is Midivrei Nevuah. That's the deraisa, the quasi deraisa thing. The Megillah Yom is Kar V'Nasim Ksiv. It's by the Megillah Sester. It's talking about everything is by the day. Shalpman is by the day. Reading Megillah is all by the day. Where's this idea of reading Megillah at night? That's Midrabanan. Maybe even hundreds of years later was enacted. Maybe yes, maybe not. But it's fundamentally it's a different type of idea. Marmuk number 5. This is the Night of Yehuda says this. The Shagasari as well. The Shagasari wrote a sefer. He's known as like the Shagasari, but he wrote a sefer called Turei Even on Mesechus Megillah. So over there in Mesechus Megillah, Daf Dalet and Aleph, he makes the same observation. Again, he's quoting Rabbeinu Tam that primary reading is by the day, secondary reading is at night. But the Shagasari gives the same explanation of the Night of Yehuda. Nearly, it seems to me, the high Kriya Delilah, the reading of night, ain't all midrabanan. It's only fundamentally midrabanan. The ain't ikr chiyav shel ruach hakodesh. It's not coming from ruach hakodesh, from the Nevuah. It's not coming from that place like the rest of Purim. It's not coming from Gil Sester. It's a takana midrabanan. Okay, so that's Rabbeinu Tam, and that's the explanation of Rabbeinu Tam. Okay, 2 problems. Problem number 1. Problem number 1 is really in just the etzem shita, the very idea of Rabbeinu Tam is problematic from the Gemara that we saw in the beginning. If you remember, what was the Gemara? The Gemara said, Yeshua ben Levi came and said, person is obligated to read the Megillah at night, l'shanoisa bayom. And the Gemara said, well, the Bnei HaYeshiva thought, what does that mean, l'shanoisa? It means they read the Megillah at night and learn Mishnayos, Mesechus Megillah by the day. Comes, who was it? Comes Rabbi Yirmiyah and said, no, that's not what he meant. He meant read the Megillah at night and repeat it by the day. If the main reading, from the obligation of Megillah Sester is by the day, then how could the Bnei HaYeshiva think that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is undoing the reading the Megillah by the day and saying the only time to read the Megillah at night, what do you do by the day? You learn some Mishnayos. What's going on over here? Especially if you go according to those Achrayim that there was a span of hundreds of years, right? That the original takana was reading the Megillah by the day, And midrabanan, maybe hundreds of years later, we're going to institute reading the Megillah at night. So not only are and the Bnei Yeshiva, what's their havamina? They're thinking that comes Rabbi Shimon Levi. Not only am I adding a derabanan, to read the Megillah at night, I'm going to replace the deraisa with that. I'm going to say, instead of reading the Megillah at day, which is because of Megillah Sester, that's from Nevuah, I'm going to say only at night. What should I do by day? Now you have a good 45-minute break. Your schedule's now open 45 minutes. Learn some Mishnayos. What's that about it? So you need Rabbi Yirmiyah. That's not what he meant. What he meant is, Avada, keep the Mikra Megillah by the day because that's the primary reading. It just means to add a reading at night. What's the Havamina? Rabbi Shimon Levi is going to come and undermine the real Mikra Megillah, which is by the day? Doesn't make any sense. If you tell me the main thing is at night, okay, then I could hear that Rabbi Shimon Levi is saying, listen, you did the main thing at night, don't worry about the day. But if the main thing is by the day, what's the Bnei Yeshiva thinking that Rabbi Shimon Levi means don't do the day one, only do the night one? And you need Rabbi Yirmiyah to explain that's not what he meant? It's a pella.
Also, L'Shanais V'Yayim sounds like it's secondary.
Right, the language is like, to repeat it.
Yeah.
Even when Rabbi Yirmiyah explains, it's repeating. It's a pella. So the Rosh himself is bothered by this, and he doesn't give he gives an answer, but you'll see for yourself. It's Rabbi Natan, the Rosh in Marmukah number 6. So the Rosh says, after he quotes Rabbi Natan with all the rayas Rabbi Natan has, he says like this: even though the Bnei Yeshiva, after hearing this Rabbi Shimon Levi, right, their thought process was that what does Rabbi Shimon Levi mean? He means to read the Megillah at night and only to learn Mishnayos Megillah by the day. So the question is, if Rabbi Natan is saying that Rabbi Shimon Levi is agreeing that the main reading is by the day, he's just revealing to us that midrabanan there's a reading at night. So what's the havamina? That the only thing to do is derabanan and to forget about the deraisa? So what were the Bnei Yeshiva thinking? Says the Rosh, okay, listen, that's a havamina. Maskan is not like that. Maskan is not like that. In other words, what he's saying is, you're right, the Bnei Yeshiva completely missed the boat. They did not chap at all this entire inyan. They did not chap at all. And when Rabbi Yirmiyah said, no, that's not what Yeshua Levi means, Rabbi Yirmiyah was explaining to them that you missed the entire inyan. Like, you were thinking completely backwards. You weren't just making a mistake about what Rabbi Shimon Levi meant. You made a fundamental mistake in what Mikra Megillah is about. Like, you were thinking that Mikra Megillah by the night is primary. You're completely wrong. Mikra Megillah by the day is primary. Obviously, that's a doichik. So, again, this is a major problem for Rabbeinu Tam. But again, Rabbeinu Tam has like 5 rayas. We just like a bunch of rayas to him. And this is a shita, by the way, that's accepted by most of the Rishonim. That the primary reading is by the day. Reading by the day is because of Nevuah. Reading by night is only midrabanan. And because of that, the Shechiyanu at night has to be repeated by the day because that's the main reading at night. But the problem is, you have this Gemara, it's Takapella, what the Bnei Yeshiva were thinking, that they had a thought that you don't have to do by the day. You only do by night. How could we be replacing the reading of Nevuah with the reading midrabanan? How can you replace that? It doesn't work. Okay, that's a problem.
Maybe you could say that the reason why the yeshiva figured that it starts at night is because we go by night. The day starts at night. So since the day starts at night, it's an agaf. In other words, mitzvah is ribayoim. Right. But since the day starts at night, so I want you to start the mitzvah at night also.
So you're touching on something. You're touching on something, which I think we're going to get there. The problem is, again, we're not. What's interesting is that we're not, like the Bnei Yeshiva, we're not trying to suggest also do Shalach Manis at night. And also Matanas Savyoim at night, Mitzvah at night. So right, so
the after Megillah.
Megillah is the main thing of Purim.
And it starts by the night.
Since it starts at night,
okay, so we'll have to explain it. We'll have to.
So why do you make a Shechiyanu? Make a Shechiyanu because it's no.
Right. So we're going to have to polish it. We're going to polish the idea. We're going to see. It's going from something. It's a good thought. That's problem number 1. Okay, problem number 2 is the opinion of the Rambam. Okay. The Rambam in Marmukah number 7 disagrees with the Rabbeinu Tam. And the Rambam writes that no, you make a Shechino at night, you do not have to make a Shechino by the day. The Rambam says it's like Sukkot. It's like Hanukkah. You made a Shechino the first thing in the mitzvah, you don't have to do it anymore. Finished. The Rambam writes like this, and now that's not a problem so far, you'll see in a second. Marmukah number 7, again, the Rambam, this is towards the beginning of Hilchos Megillah. The Rambam says, mitzvah l'kroisa b'laylu b'yom. Right? So far, things that we know they're familiar with. You have to read the Megillah at night, and you have to read the Megillah by the day. V'kol alayla kashel l'kriyas alaylu, v'kol yom kashel l'kriyas yom. The reading at night, you can do all night. The reading by the day, you can do all day. So Umavarach kaidim karesa balayla. Now says the Rambam. And before you read the Megillah at night, you have to make 3 brachas. Right? Shalosh brachas say you have to make 3 brachas. Bracha number 1, bracha to Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu al mikra Megillah. Okay. Bracha number 2, bracha to Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam she'asinisim laviseinu v'yom mehem uzman hazeh. That's bracha number 2. And bracha number 3, bracha to Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam she'achiyanu v'kimanu v'giyanu uzman hazeh. Those are the 3 brachas by the night. U'bayom ein echayis u'varach she'achiyanu. But by the day, you don't have to repeat she'achiyanu. So it's not like Rabbeinu Tam. He's disagreeing with Rabbeinu Tam. Well, the Rambam is allowed to do it. Fine. The problem is that the Vilna Gaon, you don't have this recorded in front of you, but the Vilna Gaon in Shulchan Aruch says that the Rambam still agrees to the fundamental principle of Rabbeinu Tam. Because Rabbeinu Tam, if they had a bunch of rayas to him. And so the Vilna Gaon does not want to say that the Rambam just disagrees with the fundamental point of Rabbeinu Tam. It says the Vilna Gaon, no. The Rambam agrees to the fundamental point of Rabbeinu Tam, which is that the main reading is by the day. And like the Noid of Yehuda and the Shagasari said, not just the main reading. It's that's Midivri Nevuah. That's Kamat Midraisa. The reading at night, that's Midrabanan. So and that's why, again, that's where Rabbeinu Tam's all the rayas. That's the pasuk in Tehillim sounds like that. This Karvin Naisim, and the Mishnah only talks about reading Megillah at day. All these rayas. That's and the Rishalmi. That's what Rabbeinu Tam is true. The Rambam is just disagreeing with the point that Rabbeinu Tam came up with because of that. Rabbeinu Tam said, well, if that's true, then the Shechianu at night is not going to help you for the Mikra Megillah by the day because it's a fundamentally different inyan. It's a deraisa dika mitzvah, and you just made a Shechianu on a derabbanan. On that the Rambam disagrees. The Rambam says, no, you're right that by the day is an under madrega, it's a whole different inyan. But l'maisa the Shechianu at night works for the day as well. That's the sheet of the Rambam. The problem is, why? I mean, Rabbeinu Tam seems to make a lot of sense. I understand it's the same words. It's the same Megillah, using the same Megillah by the day as you use by the night. It's the same people, you clap Haman, I get it. But it's a different mitzvah, it's a different inyan. The last night was Midrabanan, maybe hundreds of years later, after Purim, and by the day is because of Nevuah. So, what's the if you agree with that point, then the logical next step would be like Rabbeinu Tam, that the Shechianu at night does not work for the Shechianu at day, it's a different inyan. So what's the thing that the guy is saying? The Rambam agrees to the Rabbeinu Tam that fundamentally, Taka right, the day is a different inyan, but still the Shechianu of night works for the Shechianu by the day. It will be, again, even though the words are the same, it will be like a person I don't know, a person's making he's lighting Hanukkah candles at night. Right? So it's the first night he makes a shechianu, and the next day he's wearing a new suit. So I made a shechianu last night and made a little work. It's a different inyan. It's a whole different inyan. What is one to the other? I made a shechianu. You make a shechianu the night of Hanukkah, and the next day you're going to do a Peter Chamar. So you make a shechianu. It's a different mitzvah. So I understand. So the Megillah day and night looks the same. It's a different mitzvah. One's Midrabanan, one's Midraisa, one's Nevuah. So what's the Rambam talking about? If you want to say that the Rambam disagrees with the whole point of Rabbeinu Tam, that it's one mitzvah repeated twice, okay, fine, then I get it. But once the Vilna Gaon says that the Rambam agrees to the fundamental point of Rabbeinu Tam, then why not take it to the next? Well, then the thing with Shechianu, Rabbeinu Tam seems to be correct.
One of Rabbeinu Tam's proofs says call Yom Kosher. Rambam sticks to call.
Yeah, I understand. It's like the guy. There are Achronim that say not like the guy. That the Rambam is disagreeing with the fundamental point of Rabbeinu Tam. The guy is not like that. Huh? No, I understand. Again, you can always. That's what the guy will say. The Rambam is just saying practically. I mean, practically on the Durabanan level. Yeah, okay, that's back and forth. I'm just saying in the Vilna Gaon, though, you have this problem.
What's the also by the day that Shechianu is for all mitzvahs?
So that's what. So halach l'maisa, because practically there is a machlokes between Rabbeinu Tam and the Rambam. L'maisa, whether you have to make a Shechianu by the Megillah of the day. So what's the halacha? So we make the Shechianu. But we have in mind that it should also be for the other mitzvahs, right? To be machmer, because according to the Rambam, you shouldn't make a shechianu.
Interesting.
So really, we primarily hold a Rabbeinu Tam. But in order to hedge our bets, to make sure even the Rambam is okay with it, so we make a shechianu. We have in mind that it's really for the Suda and Shachmanis, which is a little bit difficult, because you're not going to do the Suda and Shachmanis for a bunch of hours. So it's but it's one of those things we're just trying to sort of work with the Rambam as well.
The Rambam would make a shechianu on Shlachmanis and Sisayim also?
So that's also a good point, right? So again, really, we're throwing it down. That's the point.
I'm just asking.
No, that's a good point. We're just trying to.
Rambam says you don't make a shechna by day. Does he say to make one for those other mitzvahs?
No, so he doesn't say. That's the point. So it's like again, that's what we're primarily looking at. Tom, we're trying to alleviate some of the pressure. So we make we have in mind for shechna, even though it's definitely a daichik, but that's the minute. We do that sometimes. If such a thing, the person makes a bracha l'vatala, what do we do? Baruch Shem, right? It's from the Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi says to do that. It doesn't really fix it. It's not like you go around saying brachas with Baruch Shem. So there are certain things we do just to alleviate the pressure. So that's the same thing over here. Okay, fine. This is the problem. So again, just to chazer over, we have two fundamental problems over here. Again, in this sheet of Rabbeinu Tam, which we'll assume right now that it's everyone agrees to, but there's two fundamental problems. First of all, if it's true that the primary reading is by the day, and that's the Nevuah reading, and Midrabanan is by the night, so what were the Bnei HaYeshiva thinking? That all you have to do is the night one, and don't worry about the day, and just learn Mishnayos by the day. I can have such a havamina, number one. And number two, if this is true that the primary reading is by the day, then why would the Rambam say that the Shechiyonu at night takes care of the day? You don't have to repeat Shechiyonu by the day. It's a new mitzvah, it's a primary mitzvah. Okay, so it's like this. Let's switch gears a little bit. So we know that, what's the theme of Purim, right? Everyone, in Lav Nevi'im, Hein B'nei Nevi'im, and he has an Indian of making themes on Purim. So what's the theme of Purim? The theme of Purim is Mimavis L'chaim, right? From death to life, right? That was what was being threatened by Haman, is our very existence. And so, Baruch Hashem comes in Isat Purim, and we live. In other words, there are two stratas, there are two dimensions in which we operate. There are the things that we do. There are the activities that we undertake, the movements of our lives, the things that we do, right? The proof that we're here. If a guy is building a building, so he builds a building. Oh, we have a raya that there's such a person as a contractor because there's a building here. There's a certain level of things that you do. But then there's be'etzim who you are. There's atzmius, there's the essence of a person, and then there's your activities in life, there's what you do. This Inyan that Haman has a problem with us. What's Haman's issue? Haman, again, that's what makes Purim and what makes Amalek unique, is that Amalek doesn't just have a problem with things that Jewish people do. Haman doesn't just have a problem. Amalek doesn't just have a problem with there being an imprint of the Jewish people on the world. That's not his primary issue. Amalek and Haman's primary issue is the very life of the Jewish people. The B'tzias, the essential existence of the Jewish people. And we celebrate Purim. Our victory over Haman means to celebrate not the things that we do, but the very existence of who we are. This is why, it's interesting when it comes to Purim, there's a mitzvah adol yada to drink. Right? What's drinking? Drinking takes away, it erases the significance of what you do. Right? Guy's drunk, doesn't know what he's doing. So you can't hold it against him the next day, Shushan Purim, you can't hold it against what the guy did the previous day. He was drunk. So what drinking does? Drinking strips away all the activities of a person's life, or takes away the chashivas of all your activities, and what remains behind is just you. You're Pashut alive, you're existing. That's what happens when a person, usually when we're in a normal way of living, who we are, our existence, is covered over and sort of disguised, and sort of behind the scenes because there's so much chashivas to what we do. We pay so much mental effort and energy devoted to what we do to make sure that what we do is proper, that what we do is good, and so on and so forth. So we sort of, who we are is behind the scenes. Comes Purim, and all that we do is already completely, you can't pay attention to it. So all that's left to focus on is who the person is. That's why there's a minig of costumes, right? What's a costume? The original, I mentioned this by Shal Shiddas to some of the guys, that the original minig was not just to have a costume. The minig was to change costumes. To constantly change your costume. Because that's what Purim is. Purim is that what you do, insignificant. Now you're a cowboy, next moment you're a policeman. It's changing, it doesn't make a difference. What's the tzad hashava? Tzad hashava is you. Tzad hashava is you. Atzmius, the essence. This is true by the Jewish people, and this is what Haman couldn't stand. Haman didn't just not like what we do. Haman couldn't stand a Jewish person being alive, the livelihood, the livingness of the Jewish person. That's what he couldn't stand. What you do with your life, whatever, live it. This is true for the Jewish people. This is also true. The Jewish people are bound to Torah. Yidishkeit is a reflection of who we are. The same thing it is with Yidishkeit. Yidishkeit, there's also two dimensions to Yidishkeit. There's a side of Yidishkeit of what we do, of what we're supposed to do. And to figure out how a Jewish person is supposed to live with Yidishkeit, we have two primary categories of Torah to instruct us how to live. There's what's Torah Shebachsav, and there's Torah Sheba'al Peh. And in terms of figuring out what to do, there is a certain structure. The first thing that we look at is Torah Shebachsav. And Torah Shebachsav tells us a very, sort of basic outline of what we're supposed to do. And comes Torah Sheba'al Peh with specific rules and regulations and ways of figuring out Torah Shebachsav, then fills in all the blanks. So if you want to focus on the doingness of Yiddishkeit, then we obviously, the two ways to figure out what to do as a Jew is Torah Shebachsav, Torah Sheba'al Peh, and Torah Shebachsav is number one, it's primary, and Torah Sheba'al Peh is secondary, because that's how we figure out what to do. You have to, Chazal, Torah Sheba'al Peh is not coming out of nowhere, it's coming as an extension, and as a commentary to Torah Shebachsav. But that's all in terms of what Yiddishkeit looks like in a museum. You understand? So in a museum, if you want to figure out, what did the Jewish people, like Chas v'Shalom, by the enemy, by World War II. So his plan was, Lahashmer La'Aved, and to have a museum of what the Jewish people were like. And what would be in the museum? Torah Shebachsav and Torah Sheba'al Peh. So the pasuk would say pre-Eitz Hadar. What's a pre-Eitz Hadar? There'll be an esrog. That's what Jewish people used to do. But everyone knows that that's all what Yiddishkeit looks like. But there's also a living, breathing Yiddishkeit. And a living, breathing Yiddishkeit is not just the pasuk of Pri Eitz Hadar and then an esrog. What's the living, breathing Yiddishkeit? It's like what an esrog smells like, And what it feels like after a few days of Sukkot. Like I give the example by Shal Shudas. It's like in Chumash, it says that the mun, by the pasuk of the mun, it says Hayom 3 times. That's what it says in Chumash. Comes Torah Sheba'al Peh, and Torah Sheba'al Peh interprets that means that you should have 3 meals on Shabbos. That's all in a museum. But then there's the living, breathing essence of Yiddishkeit, what a Suda Shabbos is about. What it looks like, what it feels like, what are the smells of Chant and Kogel, right? Or the Sephardi version of that. And what is Shal Shudas? When you speak to a Jew and they say, I'm going to Shal Shudas, so that's not just another meal lunch. It's the essence. It's the heartbeat of Yiddishkeit. Do you understand? I'm having a hard time explaining the words, but I think you understand. There's what it looks like in a museum, and then what it feels like when you live it, when it's a breathing, living organism. What's amazing is that although in terms of the museum of Yiddishkeit, it's first Tanakh, and then Torah Sheba'al Peh comes to fill in the blanks. But really, it's Torah Sheba'al Peh that really gives us the heart of Yiddishkeit. It animates Yiddishkeit. It makes it something that's alive and breathing. Lahavdil of Aviyadals. Take a look at the nations of the world, the kingdom of Esav, that they believe in Tanakh, but without Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's not. They would completely, everything about our lives as religious Jews would be completely alien to them. Completely alien to them. Mm-hmm. There's no hasag, they know what Shabbos is, what Pesach is, what Yontif. It's all in Tanakh. Tanakh is a very good framework to begin to figure out what to do. But if you want to really identify which one, Torah Shebachsav or Torah Sheba'al Peh, which one captures the living, breathing, and animated experience of Yiddishkeit, it's certainly Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's certainly Torah Sheba'al Peh. Because in Torah Shebachsav, it's just basic texts and basic structures and all that. And if you're only focused on text and structures, okay, then Torah Sheba'al Peh, it gives a little bit more dimension to that. But which section of Torah is capturing what it, the smells of Yiddishkeit. That's Tarsh Baal Peh. That's Tarsh Baal Peh. And by the way, more than that, that's why Tarsh Baal Peh, even after, I mentioned this by Shal Shudas, even after Rabbi Yehuda Nasi gives us a heter to write down Tarsh Baal Peh, it's still not written down. Because even after writing down Tarsh Baal Peh with Shas and Shulchan Aruch, that's just able to capture some of the structure and regulations and expanding some of the things that in Tarsh B'chsav is left a little bit unclarified. But it's only in Tarsh Baal Peh that you actually know what tefillin feel like. So in Chumash it says L'toitefais ben Yenecha. I don't know what that means. So Tarsh Baal Peh, there's one dimension of Tarsh Baal Peh, which is just to give a little bit more of an explanation of what Toitefais mean. But even that's not Tarsh. What's real Tarsh Baal Peh is putting on tefillin and what it feels like and the smell of the leather for the first time. And like when the bar mitzvah boy is putting on tefillin for the first time, he knows, he's learned about tefillin, he knows what to do, but everyone knows, and everyone's seen it, when you put the tefillin on, the boy puts in tefillin for it's completely uncomfortable, right? It's a new thing, it's a different experience. So when we talk about Tarsh Baal Peh, there's always these two things. There's the legalities, there's the structure, there's the technicalities of Torah, and in that sense, Tarsh B'chsav is primary and Tarsh Baal Peh is secondary. If you're just trying to figure out what Toitefais mean. So Tanakh begins the search, begins the definitions. You have Toitefais. Now Tarsh Baal Peh begins to explain what Toitefais are. But that's all just the things that Yiddishkeit's about. But then there's the living, breathing essence of Yiddishkeit. In that way, Tarsh Baal Peh captures the essence much more. And really, from that perspective of experience of Yiddishkeit, the essence, the lifeblood, the living, the beating heart of Yiddishkeit, Tarsh Baal Peh is it, and Tarsh B'chsav is really just trying to capture Tarsh Baal Peh. You understand? So once you know what Yiddishkeit looks like, then you can go back to Tanakh and say, okay, fine, I see it there too. But the main body that captures Yiddishkeit is Tarsh Baal Peh. Take a look at Marmuk number 8. We'll see. Let's go back mamash for a few minutes just to tie this back into Purim. This is from Sefer of Tzaddik in Peiket Ikrim, page 13. Rav Tzaddik says like this: V'zeu Tarsh Baal Peh. When we talk about Tarsh Baal Peh, she ikar haTorah. This is that's a shocking line, because if you ask someone what's the ikar, what's the primary section of Torah, it's no matter question Tarsh B'chsav. Because where is Tarsh Baal Peh working? Tarsh Baal Peh is working off of Tanakh. That's all true in terms of figuring out what words mean. You understand what Toitefais means. So Tarsh Baal Peh is working off of the word Toitefais in Tanakh. But which section of Torah is truly capturing the experience of tefillin, the life of what tefillin are? That's Tarsh Baal Peh. That's Tarsh Baal Peh. And understand, the meaning of this is that when the Rabbanu Shloim is bringing tefillin into our lives, the real place in which tefillin are captured is really in Tarsh Baal Peh. In terms of the museum of Yiddishkeit, Tanakh first, and then Tarsh Baal Peh. The living, breathing essence of Yiddishkeit, it's Tarsh Baal Peh. It's Tarsh Baal Peh. So he says like this: and that's what the Medrash says in Tanchuma. The Iker Krisis Bris al Tarsh Baal Peh. The main covenant, the main bond the Rebbeinu Shalom has to the Jewish people is because of Tarsh Baal Peh. Yerushalmi, and the Yerushalmi also says Chaviv and Divrei Seifrim Yosem Yenishal Torah. That if you ask the Rebbeinu Shalom, what part of Torah does he love more? Tarsh Baal Peh, Tarsh B'chsav. Yerushalmi says the Rebbeinu Shalom loves more Tarsh Baal Peh than Tarsh B'chsav. Why? Because Tarsh Baal Peh captures what Yiddishkeit is. Not just what. Again, it's not just the process of figuring out what to do. What Yiddishkeit is. To figure out what to do, you have to start with Tanakh and then go to Tarsh Baal Peh. But what is Yiddishkeit? The only way to really figure out what Yiddishkeit is, you have to go to Tarsh Baal Peh. You have to go to Tarsh Baal Peh. You can't to figure out what Yiddishkeit, to feel Yiddishkeit, to experience it, you can't be looking at it in such a cold way of like Tanakh and then Tarsh Baal Peh. You have to first experience it in the world of Tarsh Baal Peh. And then you could go back and figure, and fill in the blanks with Tanakh. But Tarsh Baal Peh is the strata that captures the essence of Yiddishkeit, the liveliness of Yiddishkeit. V'hainu, the Tarsh B'chsav, he noivel is chacham al yoina. The way the Rav Tzaddik puts it is that Tarsh B'chsav is like dripping from that higher wisdom of God. That's the lashon. That's what the Medrash says. Avol Tarsh Baal Peh yamshachas hachacham b'gufa chacham al yoina. Tarsh Baal Peh is the wisdom itself. In other words, if you're just trying to get drips from it, you're looking at it from the outside, just trying to figure out, the cerebral infrastructure. Then Tanakh first, then Tarsh Baal Peh. But you want to experience the thing, That's in Tarsh Baal Peh. So let's go back. What was Haman trying to get rid of? He wasn't trying to get rid of the museum. He wasn't trying to get rid of the way of figuring out what Yiddishkeit looks like. Even his descendant was okay with having a museum. And a museum would have, you have the Tanakh, and then you have Tarsh Baal Peh to explain Tanakh. What bothered Haman, and what he couldn't stand, was the life of the Jewish people. And by extension, the life of Torah. And the life of Torah is primarily found and primarily captured by Tarsh Baal Peh. And so this is the great irony of Yiddishkeit. That if you're looking at it in terms of just, like sort of from the outside, museum, Tanakh is primary, Tarsh Baal Peh is secondary. Because that's who it is. You want to know what the tafas mean. So Tanakh introduces us to the word, Tarsh Baal Peh explains more details. But if you want to experience tefillin and you want to know how to really truly capture what tefillin are, not about tefillin, but what tefillin are, that's in the domain of Tarsh Baal Peh. Tarsh Baal Peh, with all of its minhagim, with all of its experiences, that's a domain that really captures the essence of mitzvahs, and that's what Haman was trying to get rid of. Therefore, Purim is not just a celebration of our victory over Haman that we survived. By extension, it's also a yontif that's celebrating the essence of Torah. Not just the things that we do, the museum of Torah. No. The whole it was trying to, what we're celebrating on Purim is the essence of Torah, the smell of tefillin. What it feels like, like the smell of a shul and Hoshana Rabbah after all the clapping. That's Tarsh Baal Peh. You understand? That's a living, breathing Yiddishkeit. That's not a museum-dicke Yiddishkeit. That's a living, breathing Yiddishkeit. That's what we want to capture. And that is the domain and the jurisdiction of Tarsh Baal Peh. And only when you have that, when you experience the Hoshana Rabbah, then you could go back to Tanakh and try to find it in Tanakh. So here's the irony. If you're just looking at it from the outside in, like an intellectual philosopher, a PhD, whatever, so you have to go Tanakh and then Tarsh Baal Peh. But if you want to capture the essence of Yiddishkeit, the first place you go is Tarsh Baal Peh. And then you could go back to Tanakh to figure it all out. So let's go back. Mikra Megillah on Purim is trying to capture what Purim is about. And what is Purim about? Purim is not about celebrating what we do as Yidden. Purim is celebrating the essence, the lifeline of what it smells like to be a Yid, what it tastes like to be a Yid, what Hoshana Rabbah feels like, what Shalosh Shudas means when we say Shalosh Shudas, not just a third meal. You understand? That's what we're trying to celebrate on Purim. Therefore, let's go back. The mitzvah of Megillah, it's true, Rebbeinu Tam is right. Midaraisa, the Tarsh V'chsav, is by the day. And Tarsh Baal Peh, the Midrabanan, is at night. And therefore, in terms of museum, which is primary is by the day. Secondary is at night. But in terms of really capturing the essence of Yiddishkeit, really, the essence of Yiddishkeit first is really captured by the nighttime, by Midrabanans. And the day is, then after experiencing the Yiddishkeit of Tarsh Baal Peh, then you could go back to find it in Tarsh B'chsav and find hints to it in Tarsh B'chsav. But the essence of Yiddishkeit is found in Tarsh Baal Peh. Therefore, when it comes to Purim, of all Yom Tovim, Purim is a yontif that we, even though we acknowledge that Tanakh, Tarsh B'chsav, is in a certain sense primary, and Tarsh Baal Peh is secondary, but of all days, V'nahapechu, Purim is a yontif that we acknowledge that in a certain sense, there's a primary quality to Darabbanans over the Raisa. Because it's in Tarsh Baal Peh that the primary essence of Yiddishkeit, that the essence of Yiddishkeit is captured in more. And therefore, this idea of Chavivin Divrei Seifrim Yosem Yenish Al Torah, that there's a certain chashivas that the Rabbanans have over Midaraisa, and to a certain degree, the Daraisa is trying to catch up to the Darabbanans, right? And we sort of really understand what Yiddishkeit is from the Darabbanans, right? From the Tarsh Baal Peh, and then we try to see, to sort of find it in Tarsh B'chsav, but the primary place to look for it is in Tarsh Baal Peh. This resonates in Purim very, very strongly, and therefore, in the halachas of Purim, we have the following idea: that although it's taka true that the primary, that in terms of Daraisa Darabana, Daraisa is going to be by the day reading, and Darabana is going to be by the night reading, but the Bnei HaYeshiva had a thought. But since the holy of Purim is what is to capture the essence of Yiddishkeit, to celebrate the essence of Yiddishkeit, which one captures the essence of Yiddishkeit? The essence of Yiddishkeit is really in Darabbanan, in Tarsh Baal Peh. So therefore, even though technically Midaraisa, Midaraisa, it says to read the Megillah by the day. But once we have a Darabana, and once we have Tarsh Baal Peh giving us a living, breathing experience of Yiddishkeit, then that's the Inyan. Then that's the Inyan. And everything else is commentary off of that. And this is where the Rambam is coming from. That although it's taka true, Midaraisa is by the day, Midarabanan is by the night, but even the Darabanan is really just coming to, once you have the Darabanan is the lifeblood of Yiddishkeit. That's the living, that's the essence, that's the smell of Chont and Kodel. When you have that, then even the Daraisa is then just trying to have, it has its context off of the Darabanan. So says the Rambam, you can make a Shechiyonu at night. And that Shechiyonu takes care of the day. During the day is Midaraisa. Purim, you have to think differently. Regular days of the year, so Daraisa is on top, and Darabanan is on the bottom. But when it comes to Purim, although we're not going to, listen, there's still truth to that Daraisa is primary and Darabanan is secondary, but that's all when you're thinking of it museum day. But when you're thinking of capturing the essence and celebrating the essence of Yiddishkeit, then it's v'nahapechu. It's Darabanans that capture the essence of Yiddishkeit. And therefore, Davka and Purim, we have this idea that despite the fact that the normal way of thinking is that Daraisa is Iker and Darabanan is Tafel, Darabanan is secondary, on Purim, it's Davka v'nahapechu. That it's Darabanans that at some level are primary and Daraisas which are secondary. Therefore, Davka, the reading of the night, says the Rambam, because it's only Midrabanan, and you make a Shechiyonu, and that Shechiyonu takes care of the next morning's reading, which is Daraisa. Daraisa is more chashuv. Daraisa is more chashuv when you're talking about the museum of Yiddishkeit, when you're trying to figure out the technical details. But if you're trying to celebrate and capture the smell of Yiddishkeit, then Darabanans are the Iker. Darabanans are the Iker. And whatever you're making the bracha on a Darabanan, automatically the Daraisa is going to be secondary to that. And so this is what's going on over here. There's two ways to engage in the relationship of Tarsh B'chsav and Tarsh Baal Peh. Just to sum it all up very simply. If you're trying to just figure out the structure of Yiddishkeit, like what I'm calling like the museum of Yiddishkeit, then the infrastructure is Tarsh B'chsav first, Tarsh Baal Peh second. But if you're trying to capture and celebrate the essence of Yiddishkeit, the smell of Yiddishkeit, what the mitzvah is, not just how to perform it, but what does it feel? What is it? Then the relation of Tarsh B'chsav, Tarsh Baal Peh becomes v'nahapechu. Tarsh Baal Peh becomes the primary place, and Tarsh B'chsav becomes the secondary place. And so throughout the days of the year, we're always, again, just like we don't get drunk throughout the days of the year, so our modus operandi, our way of interfacing with the world and our way of interfacing with Yiddishkeit is more of the structural museum almost way of thinking, which is, what am I supposed to do? Well, in that case, Tarsh B'chsav is primary and Tarsh Baal Peh is secondary. But there's one day of the year when we get drunk. There's one day of the year where everything we do is completely irrelevant, and the only thing we focus on is the smell of Yiddishkeit. That's why the Gemara says, right? You have to smell intoxicated on Purim. Smell intoxicated, be intoxicated. No, because the smell is one of those senses that, like, what is it? You have to experience it. It's an atmosphere. It's an atmosphere. Everything else is a zach. Whatever you see with your eyes, it's an object. Whatever you taste was an object. A smell is because of something around you, an atmosphere that encompasses you. That's what a smell is. Hopefully it's a good smell. But smell means that you're picking up on an atmosphere around you. There's an atmosphere of Yiddishkeit. There's an atmosphere of Tefillin. There's an atmosphere of what it means a shalosh is. And that's something that's only captured in Tarsh Baal Peh. And Tarsh B'chsav is trying to catch up to it. Tarsh B'chsav is trying to give words to it. But the place to capture the smell of Yiddishkeit is Tarsh Baal Peh. And Purim is a day that we celebrate the smell of Yiddishkeit. Therefore, although the reading of the Megillah by the day is technically primary in terms of Daraisa Darabanan, but when we celebrate Purim, the whole thing of Purim is v'nahapechu. The whole thing of Purim is to celebrate the smell of Yiddishkeit, and the smell of Yiddishkeit is primarily by the Darabanans, and the Tarsh B'chsav, the Daraisas are trying to catch up to that. Therefore, again, that's why, although Rabbi Tam is right, that the primary reading of the Daraisa is by the day, but the Bnei HaYeshiva realized when it comes to Purim, ad kedei kach, that maybe the Darabanan replaces the Daraisa. Because the whole thing of Purim is trying to capture the smell of Yiddishkeit, and the smell of Yiddishkeit is not in Tanakh, the smell of Yiddishkeit is in Tarsh Baal Peh. And that we say, no, hold your horses, we're not replacing Tarsh B'chsav, but you are right, Bnei HaYeshiva, you are getting to the point, which is that Purim is celebrating the smell of Yiddishkeit, the essence, the feel, The atmosphere, that's Taka in Tarsh Bal Peh, not in Tarsh B'chsav so much. Ad Kedei Kach, that the Rambam agrees to Rabbeinu Tam, but the Shechiyona that you say at night, Taka takes care of the Shechiyona by the day. Why? Because the day in museum world is primary. In Purim, the day is secondary. Because Tarsh Bal Peh captures the essence, and Tanakh is trying to catch up to it to give a framework to it. But the essence is Taka in Tarsh Bal Peh. And that's what's going on over here, by the way, just to explain one other point, then I'm sorry I'm going late, but one other Nakuda is, in Rabbeinu Tam, that the primary thing is reading by the day, so why Taka? Why Taka would the Darabanan come first? Right? If the nighttime is secondary, then you make the secondary after the primary. Why would it precede it? The answer is because, again, it's hinting to this point. In museum world, Tanakh is primary, Tarsh Bal Peh is secondary, but Purim really is hinting to us something else. And in terms of the smell of Yidishkeit, the atmosphere of Yidishkeit, Tarsh Bal Peh is actually primary. And therefore, what looks like something as secondary is in truth primary, but hapachu. So the nighttime reading in Penimiyus, in terms of what Purim is really celebrating, is Taka primary, Tarsh Bal Peh over Tarsh B'chsav, Chavivim Devrei Seifim, Yosef and Shal Torah, okay? Mizaycha Taka to celebrate, to taste, and to smell of that smell of Yiddishkeit properly.